Hi, and welcome to the second season of The Talk Lane. I'm doing this first episode after a very, very long time. Today, my guest is Subhash Chandra Garg. He is India's most respected economic policy voices, having served as Finance Secretary and Secretary Economic Affairs in the Government of India. He has been closely involved in India's fiscal policy, budgets, public finance, RBI related matters, and some of the country's most important economic decisions. Today, we will sit down with him to understand India's growth story beyond the headlines: jobs, GDP, taxes, fuel prices, manufacturing, AI, China, and what the numbers may not fully tell us about the growth story of India. So, sir, thank you so much for doing this from Delhi. I am in New York today, but I'm very excited to speak to you. You have been the finance secretary, secretary economic affairs. I'm not going to make this a highly technical economic session. This is largely going to be about the burning issues or the burning questions that regular average Indian citizen has about Indian economy. We want to really go to the bottom of what is happening, which is very much beyond what the headlines and GDP numbers that are thrown at Indians in the newspapers. We want to go beyond that. So we want to really talk about Indian economy, what numbers will not really tell us, what the ground reality is like, India's growth story translating into a better life for ordinary Indians, or are we counting the gains while we ignoring the overall cost? So that's basically the large, set of our conversation going to be like.
All right.
All fair? Okay, awesome. So the first question is India's growth story real or overhyped? And I ask this because everyone says this is India's decade. We hear it from investors, global CEOs, politicians, consulting firms, market commentators. But when you look at the economy today, jobs, income, exports, manufacturing, inflation, rupee depreciation, a burning question, fiscal health. Do you think India's growth story is real or is it being oversold? So, my question to you is, what is the report card of India or economic health of India according to you?
I think it's a very fair question. The government does say from time to time that we are the largest growing economy of the world. They cite the IMF quotes, which used to be earlier that it's the largest growing economy. Now IMF usually says that it's one of the largest growing economy. You mentioned that it was said that it is India's decade. I try to do a quick Google search. When was the last time and who said that it is India's decade?
Mm.
I found that it is Narendra Modi who said last in 23, and amongst the private guys, McKinsey guys said it is in 22. So after 23, nobody has said. More than 3 years have gone. I think they all realize that it's not actually the India's decade. Um, Now coming to the growth part, India is expected to grow at about 6.6% this year. That's what IMF and others are also saying. This is in real GDP growth. If you look at the dollar growth, which is comparable across the world, it is much less. So when you sort of think about the question whether we are really growing very fast, I think you need to take a little bit of a longer term, even in the context of the current government. So it's 12 years since this government has been in place. The last term it completed in 24. So if you take from 2019 to 24, the 5 years, while there was good growth in the last 3 years post pandemic,
Hmm.
but take into consideration 2019-20, the first year, and 2021, the COVID year, 5 years total growth was sub 5%. Now, for an Indian economy, which is one of the poorest country in the world, with dollar income of only about $2,700 now, growing at 5% or sub 5% for 5 years is not really a very high rate of growth. In last 2 years, we have grown at about 7.5% in this third term. But in dollar terms, our growth is about 4%, 4.5%. So I think the headline number look good, but the real growth story is not that pleasant, that sort of illuminating.
So, this is a very interesting perspective, right? So, what changed between that comment in 2022 and 2023 to now? Because, like you rightly said, the headline number is really not the real growth story. So, first is, what is the real growth story? And then, second is, what has really gone wrong or what has changed since we made that statement, since McKinsey consultants made that statement, and since our Prime Minister Narendra Modi made that statement that this is going to be India's decade? What changed?
See, the big game in the world today about the future of economies is number one, the artificial intelligence and artificial intelligence related investments into manufacturing, AI chips, agentic devices, and other things. That is one. The second thing is the energy transition into solar, wind, basically solar all over the world, because the energy requirement is also going up sharply because of the AI and other things. Even otherwise, the people's requirement is going up, but the energy is coming from the new sources of energy, which is solar, and not from traditional coal, petroleum, gas, etc. And the third thing is the electronics manufacturing. These are driving the future growth. These are the drivers of the future growth. And in all these three things, India is not really there. We are not into the AI. We have no technological edge on solar. You would be surprised to know that the wafers, which is the from which you make the solar modules finally, 96% of them are made in China. India does make some modules, but it has to purchase all the wafers and the cells from China. So what is deciding the growth in future? India is not technologically present there. Look at the investment side. We, for last 2 years, have very little of the FDI. Net FDI is close to zero. Look at the per capita income growth. The World Bank released the data very recently. And India in the South Asia, there are 6 countries now. Only Nepal remains behind India. Everyone else is ahead. Bangladesh is ahead of us. Sri Lanka has gone into the upper middle class. So I think a lot has changed. And this AI story, the solar transition, environmental transition stories are actually in the last 4 or 5 years stories. The AI had come up after 23. So when I think the world sees why are FPIs withdrawing so much of investment from the share market of India? So I think everyone now sees, or at least most of the people see, that when the question of putting money is concerned in the Indian economy, the story of being India's decade is hollow, and therefore they don't invest. A lot has changed.
So, I have a few follow up questions on this. You spoke about investments in AI, investments in solar space, and investments in electronics manufacturing, right? So, some of the stats that some of the facts or headlines that I want to throw at you are basically India is attracting record investments in terms of building AI infrastructure. Of course, that is FDI, okay? That is coming from Googles and Metas of the world who want to set up their AI infrastructure data centers in India and South India, Telangana. So from that perspective, India is kind of, in the forefront of attracting foreign investment from in the AI infra space. And that is also because in many other countries, the the permissions that you need or the permissions granted to set up infrastructure of AI is there's a long wait if you want to go to Singapore, if you want to go to Ireland. So a very, very long wait, right? And India has kind of opened its door and is being very friendly to these investors in that space. So India is actually attracting record investment in that space.
You see, you quoted rightly. There are two big investments which have come from Google, Meta, but it's not the investment in AI. It is the investment in the data centers which will process some of the AI related things. Well, you need very large data centers across the world for processing data relating to AI. It's not AI. I think that distinction we must make it clear. It's a data center. And that investment in data center uh, in a country which is short of the electricity generation, which is not generating electricity using the and we'll come to that second part of it, the solar technologies to the extent it should be doing, and granting them enormous amount of tax concessions. And these guys will not pay tax for next 40 years. um, this is not a great investment in AI. This is investment in one of the most vulnerable sector of India. India will regret it rather than you. The power guzzling investment in data centers is not what the AI investment is all about.
So that's a fair point. And because we were talking about electricity, so we're talking about power generation, and you spoke about solar energy transition. I obviously have been visiting a lot more in last 2-3 years to India, and every time I come back to India, one of the most surprising things to me is actually the transition from petrol vehicles to actually EV vehicles, right? So Ola has done a brilliant job from two-wheelers to even cars, and more number of houses, especially in tier 2 cities. I am from Gujarat, so when I go back to Gujarat, I pretty much like every single house, every single like a tenement, they have their own solar panels, so they understand they don't really want to pay for electricity, and they understand it's expensive and solar is the way to go. And I understand this is not government's investment, but this is more like driven by the private sector, the private households' own persuasion in that space. But isn't that a transition? Isn't that where we are changing the entire outlook towards how we are going to consume power? Is it going to be the coal based energy? Is it going to be nuclear based energy? Is it going to be solar energy? Don't you think there is a drive on ground here?
Excellent. I think I also have a Gujarat connection. My wife comes from Baroda, and their own house has got a solar
Yeah.
panel, so
Yeah.
they generate electricity. Gujarat is far ahead as far as the installation of home solar systems are concerned. That's very true. All these investments in home solar systems are financed under a scheme called Prime Minister Muft Saur Bijli Yojana, in which a large part of the cost, something to the extent of about 75%, is borne by the government, and the rest is borne by the household. And that is why the government calls it Muft Solar Bijli, Saur Bijli Yojana. This is good, but this is very limited. I don't think we should get swayed too much by. Look at the primary generation of solar energy, which is done in the solar plants. We have impressive solar plants coming in Rajasthan, Gujarat, and all. But it all adds up to, let's say, about 50 gigawatt a year, right? Look at what China is doing. China would generate 500 gigawatt in a year, right? So the scale of, so after lots of years of investment, we are at about 10% of our power generation coming from the renewable sources, whereas many other countries are now moving far ahead. You mentioned electric vehicles. Electric vehicles, the passenger vehicles, is about 4 to 5% of the new vehicles sold in India are electric vehicles. Taking the scooters, etc., where the strike rate is much higher, the overall is about 10%. 60% of Chinese vehicles are electric vehicles now. 90% of Norwegian vehicles sold are electric vehicles now. The world average is about 20%. Even America sells twice the electric vehicles, despite the Trump's sort of hate for the renewable energy. We are really not that big as it sometimes appears to you, right? That is where I think we get swayed too much by the hype and the prachar, so to say. Then what is the comparative real numbers?
I have a point to make. So you said, oh, China has 60% penetration of the EVs in their kind of country or space. You know, one of the facts here though is that, and this is like several years ago. So China started this whole transition to EVs for almost a decade now. This is not a new transition for them, and that was because they understood that they have very high dependency on coal. They are a manufacturing economy, very high dependency on coal. They wanted to move away from the traditional sources of energy because they did not want to be dependent on any one source or any one country, North Korea obviously being their biggest partner here for coal import. So China's transition to EVs or alternate energy started almost a decade ago. And from what I recollect several years ago, what you will see is that if you look up the China EV sales report, you will actually see there is a spike pretty much at the end of the year. Okay, the overall, throughout the year, it will be pretty much flat, and suddenly in the end of the year, there's a spike. And then obviously throughout the year, then it remains standard again. The reason was, so China, what they were doing at that point in time is, in the last very quarters, they will see, okay, overall we've not been able to meet the target of the EV penetration in the country. So what they'll do is, at the very end of the year, the government fleet will change into EV. So they will say, we are, phasing off all our non-EV vehicles, and then we just buying new fleet, which is EV. So I generally am very skeptical about China's numbers. So their 60% push now, one is obviously I will give them credit for their vision and their execution, but a lot of it is kind of fudge. So if you see the Chinese number, the 60% that we spoke about, a large majority will actually be government fleet, and it may not really be the regular folks who are actually using EVs. What would you and from that perspective, the point that I was trying to make is that Indian EV penetration is on its own merit, like how consumers feel about it and where they want to invest, right? And I think that is the wave I would not really discount. I understand it is 10%, and if you spoke about global 20%, we're not really far behind for a country which is constrained economically on many fronts, right? Would you say, now with the new information that I've thrown in, would you still say that we are doing pretty bad in terms of our EV penetration?
See, the points you made, I think we should recognize the merit of all of them. Number one, you said the China started 10 years ahead of us. In fact, they started 20 years ahead of us. And then they started the right way. I don't know whether you heard, until year 2000 or 2005, it was the Australians who were actually leading the technologies for the solar power generation. Because how much of the solar insolation you capture depends upon decides what is the efficiency of the solar power generation. For last 20 years, after the Chinese made investment in technology, it is they who are now having all the technological edge in the world. That's why I said 94% of the global wafers where the technology is embedded in cells is made in China. 94%. They have the largest EV manufacturing companies, BYD to anyone you take it. The 10th company in the electric vehicle space is bigger than the largest of Indian company. We don't actually have electric vehicle technology or the solar technologies with us. We are so dependent. And then you come into what goes into the making of solar panels, the kind of rare earths, the magnets for the EVs and all others. Their technological advancement is so far ahead. That's not 10 years. Because we are not starting there. We are not even started for many of them. So this gap is very large. We are virtually at zero stage as far as technological advancement is concerned. We will buy some, make modules, generate some power. But that is a dependence on that country itself. And you can see the monthly data for that, right? It's 60% of the global vehicles, electric vehicles, being sort of sold in China. 80% of their, 60% of their own. So that is the kind of edge. It's not 10 years. And we are not at the starting point. Believe me, unless that is what the world doesn't. Why you asked me, why is nobody talking? Prime Minister also said at one stage that it is India's decade. Now, what is the technology? Can you cite me or find out one single technology where we have a global edge? I think reality is far sort of serious, grim. We may be very happy citing certain numbers, sometimes conjuring them up, but we'll not go very far. If you want to go far, we have to sort of do a lot of soul searching.
Yeah. And there was another point that you touched upon, which was electronics manufacturing. Again, the world is moving towards China plus one. So they're looking for an alternative, or not alternative, but kind of parallel with China. They want to reduce the dependency. You hit on the same points where you're saying 94% of the wafers are actually manufactured in China. And the world is very well aware of that. So there is a global kind of impetus or a collective reckoning that they have to move away from China, and they're looking for alternatives, especially within Asia. They have identified India as one of their key partners, and from that perspective we've obviously seen Foxconn starting their plant in India. Apple just announced a couple of quarters ago where they said, they have actually had a very strong output from India. They're trying to reduce their dependency from China. And this is just one example I'm citing. I'm sure there are more. Do you not think this is the right direction in which the India is moving to become a China plus one story?
You see, this China plus one story started doing the round during the first tenure of Trump. Because it's rightly that everyone in the world, including Americans, are concerned about China's factories, China's dominance in the industrial world. If China produces 30% of the global industrial output, then everyone else has to be concerned. Over the years, in the renewable space, we talked about Germans, Australians, others had some technological edge, but all of them is gone practically now. So it is very true. And then China's geopolitical dominance, China's sort of many other initiatives to take over control in many other countries in Asia, elsewhere, this Belt Road Initiative and all. So it was very much a sort of a concern, and the Trump administration started looking around that can we pivot from China? Because by the way, it's the American companies in 80s, 90s, and early first decade of the century, which made most of the investment in China, and that is what made China sort of far ahead. And they definitely looked at India also because India had the potential. But if you do the number crunching, I think you would have it's about 10 years now since the China plus one story started doing the round. In 10 years, how much of the output has moved from China to other countries and where it has moved? We did get the Apple and its contract manufacturers, Foxcons and others, and we now make about 30% of the global iPhones in the world, and that's reasonably good. I was associated with when I was Secretary Finance to get that scheme running around. So that is good, but that's a limited story again. There are now reports available which tells about that whatever transition happened away from China, about 60% to 70% went to Vietnam. Only less than 5% came to India. Right. It's not that major. And now, by the way, no one talks about China plus one. It is because the Trumpian administration now, with the reckless tariff increases, reckless kind of many other policy initiatives, the war, etc., and even Americans. There was a senior official of the American administration who came for ICNA dialogue here, and he said we are not going to make India a very strong nation because we had burnt our fingers with China. And so this is no longer China plus one story. So, and by the way, in these three spaces, barring the electronics, semiconductor, where Americans are still quite strong, the Americans themselves are not strong, right? So I don't think we can draw very large amount of comfort from this China plus one story.
So, a follow up on that, right? So, this is actually very true. And this was actually going to be one of my follow ups with you. Uh, are we really blaming Indian administration and India per se of not doing enough to be China plus one? Because, like you rightly said, um, United States or Trump administration or Americans in general do not want to make the same mistake as they made with China. They let China grow, they let China flourish, and they now understand that's not what we want. So we would and I think that's like an active some sort of a political agenda against India, that for some reason or the other we have to ensure that India always remains a little shaky, or we should have power enough to derail whenever we want it. And that means investment in Pakistan, investment in Nepal, investment in any other adversary of India, undermining India, right? So that is something which I don't think we can really control. So, if that is really the situation, and if for us as a country, we need to have, or for us as a country, if we want to excel in the manufacturing space, what will be our strategy? What is it that India should really do?
So this is the most serious situation or question to my mind. We have had many sort of versions of Make in India, production linked incentive schemes, and other programs to push for taking manufacturing to about 25% of India's GDP. This is going on for the last 3-4 decades. And we have stuck at 15% all the while. We are just not moving up 15% of our GDP. So we are industrially growing at the rate of our GDP growth. That is why it remains almost flat at 15%. With Americans also now turning hostile to Indians, so to say, and we should be, the way they treated us in tariffs, the way they have treated on the EV space, Tesla was to come, it has not come. It has decided finally to call it quits. On semiconductors, one or two companies came, but that's where it stopped now. It's not coming any longer. I told you about FPI's withdrawing. So, and India being threatened with the worst kind of tariffs. At one point of time, we had 50% tariffs. The way you are handling the H-1B visas and other kind of things, you can see very clearly that there is not only a hidden but an open hostile agenda against India. So if you then decide that if we are not expecting even technological transfers or investment transfers from India, from US, then what do you do? And here you have to look at the story of Vietnam and others. Right? See, Vietnam had fought war with China for many years in 70s, and it was its adversary. Vietnam fought war with China about 20 years after we fought with China.
Yeah.
Right? In early 60s, 62. But today, most of the technological transfers from China is to Vietnam. In fact, the Americans got so much concerned that the Chinese investment and technological transfer is going into Vietnam that in the tariff they put provisions that it should not be the transfer or transiting through Vietnam, right? But Vietnam has got it. Would we do it? We have stopped a complete sort of ban on Chinese technologies. If China has future of technologies or all the technologies in the future of the growth, then if you don't do the business with them, then either you should be able to do it on your own, that you should be able to evolve technological sort of prowess technologies and the products you can do it, or you do it with those who have it. If you don't do any of them, then you can't be a Vietnam also. Look at South Korea, for example. Look at Taiwan. Taiwan specialized. It was semiconductors manufacturing in US. At some point of time, the US guys thought that semiconductors manufacturing abroad is cheaper for us, more advantageous to us. Taiwan took it away. Today, 60% of the chips are made in Taiwan. Yesterday, the South Korean company on the semiconductor AI side listed in the New York Stock Exchange with $26 billion of that. South Korean stock markets have risen more than 100% in last 1 year, largely because of the AI and the related investments in there. So everyone in the world which is growing, whether it's China, whether it's South Korea, whether it's Vietnam, has learned to do business with US and China. Because they also themselves don't have. But we don't have the technology, we don't have that investment prowess, yet we don't do business with them.
My perspective is slightly different. For us, China is a very controversial subject because of the border tension that we share with them. because we also believe that they fund Pakistan, who's our biggest adversary. They fund Nepal, and they fund a lot of our neighbors and then turn them against us. Uh, in 2020, we've obviously had kind of like a semi war with them in the Gaulan Valley, Aksai Chin area. We are also accusing them of encroaching our land at the borders. So for us, it's not straightforward to really get in business with China because there is an active kind of a political tension that we share with them, right? And I think Indian government stand, for which largely Modi government was also applauded, where they said, if you are creating tensions for us at the border, we will cut you off loose. Like, we're going to take very harsh measure. We will not really do any business with you, because India still remains a very big market, even for Chinese goods or Chinese manufacturers, right? And I think there was also a deliberate move that if we move away from China, we may be able to have the homegrown technologies which will reduce our dependency on China or any other economy in the world. And we were also banking on it because we have the best technical minds in the world. Right? We have IITs of the world, bits of the world. We have best engineers on ground. We have good talent on ground. And that's what we were banking on. Would you agree with me there?
So I would agree with you as far as the talent observation is concerned. Indians are quite talented. Indian talent from IITs elsewhere, now reflected in GCCs and others, or you go to Silicon Valley. As far as talent is concerned, we are second to none.
Mm.
But when it comes to technology, we are the worst people. I give this a challenge to, in many of the podcasts which I do, look at 500 years of global history and a lot of innovations from shipping to sort of railways, aircrafts, motor cars to now AI and everything has happened. Find out one technology and product which Indians have contributed to the world. One cutting edge technology. And therefore, the record of India producing the global beating, world beating technologies is pathetic. So, talent doesn't translate into technologies and the products. That's a fact. You use the expression, maybe we will be able to come up with something. This maybe is a very loaded statement. We may keep on hoping, but without the necessary factual abilities, ecosystem, technological sort of system, you can't create the products. It will not happen. And that is why it is so important for us to get into technological collaboration. By the way, even China, South Korea, and others were technologically laggards uh, about 5 to 6 decades back. They learned the hard way that the only way is to sort of get into the technological collaborations with those who have those technologies, then master it, and then come up with the better products. Right? We have had this jugaad mentality, which is not the innovation over an existing product. It is somehow making a substandard product or a product work for Indian conditions. That is not which leads to you to technological prowess. And therefore, this maybe will keep on stretching. We will not get it. Now, you made an observation about the political problems with China and the reason for those political problems coming in the way and the right decision of the government not to do business with country which we have political problem. I entirely agree that this is a political choice. You make this political choice, but the hard facts are not different. I remember what you said that after the Galwan War or clashes, it was not a war, after Galwan clashes, India decided to boycott the Chinese products, and we TikTok and many other apps we closed and things and steps were taken. But look at the 5 years record since then. How much do we import from China today? Then as compared to 21. Last year, in 25, 26, we ended up having a, an import or trade deficit with China, which exceeded $100 billion. Right? It has not translated, those threats or the decisions didn't translate into sort of making China cut down to its place. Our dependence actually increased. So any hard-nosed businessman, any hard-nosed economic thinking people will need to think about whether doing politics is a better returns giving kind of option for the country, or doing business with even an adversary is a better option. I told you the Vietnam had war with China later than us. By the way, one more question which you should always also ask: why is it that India has problems with all its neighbors? It has problem with China, it has problem with Pakistan, it has problem with Bangladesh, now it has problem with Nepal. Is it that everyone around us is a villain and we are the virtues? Can it be the other way around also, that we are not actually smart enough to do business with them, to build? I talk sometimes about our dependence, which you saw during this American-Iran war. There's been proposals for bringing the gas from Turkmenistan and Oman to India, but it will not come unless we know how to do business with China, with Pakistan. So it has not come. Our dependence continues. I acknowledge that we have a choice of not doing business with China, and if it suits our domestic politics, it gives political returns. You may choose to do it, but economically you will suffer. Similarly with China, similarly with Bangladesh, similarly with Nepal and others. I think someday we should do a more honest thinking about, are we a good businessman? Are we a good economy managers? Do we sort of give too much of precedence to political interest, elections, or the real economic interest?
So, again, couple of follow-ups from this. So, while you spoke about dependency, you spoke about the deficit, right? The export deficit with China. But that is not just Indian phenomena, that's a global phenomena. United States considers China their biggest adversary, their biggest enemy, and Trump administration, even Barack Obama before that, or Biden administration, would have done anything, would have given anything to towards China's supremacy. They're not able to do that. And the whole tariff war, the world has seen it play out, where Trump was acting up every day and wanted to do everything in its power to bring China to its knee. Could it do that? No. The largest economy in the world is not able to decouple itself from China. India is very small compared to that, right? And it has very little to do with the merit of United States or China or India per se. It has largely to do with the way China has grown and advanced its economy. It is so, like, I'm reading about some of these articles, and some of the exporters, and I was talking to them, and they said you cannot beat the Chinese supply chain excellence. So you cannot produce goods at a quality and at the price point that they do. The world has conceded to that. I will not blame India so much to say that, oh, like, we have this tension, and yet you end up doing business with them no matter what you do. But that's not India, that's globally. The world is at the knees when it comes to importing from China. We don't have an alternative. So that's my first point.
I entirely agree. In fact, you have now accepted that the Chinese sort of prowess in industrial products, factory of the world, is so great and has become so domineering, so to say, or so essential for the world, that forget Europeans who don't make any sort of noise about it. They have accepted this very clearly. Even Trump, who tried to beat everyone in the world, does business with China respectfully, right? So why should we not accept it? This fact. Let me give you another perspective. How you build it. In 1978, India and China were almost same per capita income. In fact, Chinese technological industry standards and abilities in the economic space were far worse than India. They had virtually zero technologies. They had no investments, and they had destroyed their skill sets of the people. There were no factories in China at that time, except for arms and some of the local industrial. They had no exports. This economy was not recognized anywhere. But in 50 years since then, China has built it all, right? From zero. We were at 20 at that stage, but we have moved from 20 to 21 or 22 only. That is the difference in the kind of strategic choices you make. That is where I was saying to you that you may decide after the Galwan clashes or something that we will show the China its place without actually being able to do anything about it, and still having this sort of notion that you can show the China its place. You can kill Chinese economy. Instead, it happened the other way around. Our dependence increased. So I have no objection in accepting this argument that the most powerful countries in the world also treat China with respect now. They, of course, would like maybe someday something will emerge. We don't know whether the AI related kind of growth in America can sort of bring back the mozo to Americans and all. They're doing a lot of fine work in chips making and many of these things. They're far ahead. But China there is catching up. They know that they need to catch up. But where are we? We are not at point one. So therefore, unless we recognize the true state of our existence, technological ability, etc., we may talk about it, but we will not move ahead.
Right, fair point. So, this brings me to the next phase of our conversation, which is more around GDP. What are we actually measuring? Okay, so 2015, India changed its methodology on how it will measure the GDP. What India did was basically they moved from base year of 2004 to 5 to 11 and 12, and the newer data sets like corporate fillings were used to eventually measure our GDP. Some people say this made GDP more accurate. Others say it made the post 2015 numbers harder to compare with the earlier period. So, from that perspective, my question to you is, did the 2015 methodology change make India's growth number more accurate, or did it make the growth story look better?
So I am aware of quite a few leading economists from India, including Arvind Subramanian, who was with me as chief economic advisor in the finance ministry, sort of questioning that 2015 change with the base year 2011-12, and they they have written papers about saying that after 2011, the new data according to the 2015 revision, overstate the Indian GDP. I don't believe in that theory. I think the change in 2015, accepting the UN's new methodology of market price based kind of GDP calculation, taking the data from the corporates, which is a real data, into consideration, overstated the GDP. It might have presented a better picture in comparison to the older method of calculation, but that is because the methodology change. It's not that the methodology is wrong. It's changed. You are adopting a better methodology. You're capturing more of the GDP, and that is what led to a better picture for some time in during the Modi government's first term. So I have no sort of quarrel with the change in 2015. By the way, we now have one more change. We have now in 25 shifted to 22-23 as the base. One of the findings which you might have come across or not, that when the government changed to the new base of 22-23, they revised down the GDP of 23-24, which is the last year, and the year before, by about 12 lakh crores. That showed, in a way, so people can make the same argument that this revision shows the Narendra Modi government's second term in poorer light.
Yes.
Right. What Narendra Modi government's first term showed the second term of Manmohan Singh government in poor light. Right. So these kind of changes do take place. I don't think we should question much about it. I had this impression that 23-24 GDP was not rightly calculated when it was issued by the same government. And when the new methodology got the right kind of data, they had to revise it down. So the sum total of all this is, instead of quarreling with the methodologies and all, we should see the trend, how things are spanning out in two terms. One is the GDP growth as per Indian system, that is in rupee, and secondly, relative to where the world is going in terms of US dollar. We should see both of them together to see where India is actually heading.
So, from that perspective, we obviously have a good picture that GDP is growing, India is growing, right? But even when the GDP is growing, why are ordinary Indians not feeling richer? This is where I want to connect numbers with real life, right? So, a country can show GDP growth, but people may still feel pressure from housing, school fees, healthcare, fuel, EMIs, and taxes. So, and that's the story we want to capture into, right? Why is it that our GDP numbers are growing, but ordinary Indian doesn't feel richer?
So, see, what happens is that GDP growth, let us say you have 300 billion dollar or $3 trillion size of total income of the country. GDP is nothing but the gross total income of all of us together, everyone, Indians, corporates, government, all put together. Their total income is GDP, roughly. You can take it that way. So when it grows, let us say it grows by 6%, so 3 trillion, you have the growth of 180 billion rupees coming up. So when you want to associate who actually get to receive this additional 180 billion rupees of income, then you get the answer whether the people are feeling better or not, right? So this additional income is broadly shared between three sort of players. One is the people who receive it in the form of higher wages, salaries, uh, transfer payments, etc. So that is one big, roughly about 60%, normally speaking, of the increment goes to the people. That is why they should feel better. The second stakeholder who receives it is the corporates in the form of their profits, which they retain. So, and the third one is the government, which gets it in the form of taxes. Right? So these are the three sharers. If you look at the post-COVID story, the growth of people's income in the form of wages and all has been relatively much smaller.
And why so?
Corporate,
Why is that the case?
in economics, this is typically sort of spoken to as a type of recovery. So if you recovery or the growth, you have two kind of strands going. If you don't use the third strand for the government, so you would find if most of the profit is most of the growth is retained in the form of profit. So companies get to revise prices, get lesser taxes, can constrain the wages growth. If you look at the wages growth last 4 or 5 years including in the industry like software, where now the day of judgment, in a way, the problems are coming. It's not only not no growth in terms of new hiring, the wage growth is also much smaller. So the relative negotiation power between the corporates and the wage earners. And wage earners, if you have too many, so if we have too many engineers competing for the post, too few posts, the corporates can drive down the salaries. Same happens in the wages for the farm labor elsewhere. You don't sort of there are too many people available, the wage will not increase. So for all these reasons, the growth of personal incomes, which drives the personal consumption, has not grown. This is also reflected in other kind of data if you see it. Why is there so much growth of credit card loans? Why is there so much growth of gold related loans? Why is there so much of reduction in the net financial savings of the household sector? All this tells you that the income growth of the households and the individuals has been far more uh, stymied in the last 5 years than the corporates and the government's taxes growth. Now, if you have the second kind of implications, if your fuel prices go up, if your vegetable prices go up, even that income which has not grown enough gets further squeezed by the increase in prices. So that is why this is what you hear or you get a sense from the people in general that they're not feeling better or as good as the country's sort of policymakers feel about the GDP growth, which, by the way, is not that good, which I talked to
Yeah.
you about.
So to summarize it, you're saying as GDP grew, inflation grew. Inflation was hitting the pocket of the average middle class or ordinary people in India. Because GDP was growing, certain sectors benefited, but they were largely corporates. So, in some sense, there has been disparity, and the profits have not really reached people on ground. So, they did not see increase in wages, but they feel the brunt of the inflation is why we have not seen the real GDP growth translating into wealth on ground. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think fair point,
Yeah.
fair summary.
Yeah. So now that comes to the second point. We're talking about the fact that corporates have obviously benefited. GDP grew, certain corporates benefited, they grew, overall economy grew. Where are the jobs? The economy may be growing at 7 to 8%, but stable, well paying private sector jobs still feel hard to find for many young people in India, right? So, is India facing unemployment, underemployment, low wages, or lack of quality jobs? What is the real picture?
All of them. So we do a survey in India called PLFS. The government brings out year to year. If you read PLFS, there is a growth in employment. People in the jobs are increasing at an impressive rate. Unemployment rate is low, uh, around 3.5%, which is frictional, which is not. So, like GDP numbers, the the official employment job story is quite rosy, right? But if you look at the counterfactuals, for a PN's job or a low job of inspectors or some sub-inspector constable, the number of applications which come from the Indian youth is multiples of thousands. Right? The jobs are not there. The job seekers are in multitude. You see even now the top end jobs, IITs, sort of recruitment, campus recruitment and all, even there, you now see 30-40% of the people not landing up jobs. So the two stories, official sort of growth of jobs and employment, and the practical story of people's wages, service, etc., and service jobs, regular jobs not being available. Both of them are true, but both of them cannot be true we if we are talking truth on both the sides. Right. I'll tell you one thing which you would find sort of amazing. If you compare 24 data of PLFS, which is the government job data, with the 2018 government job data, that is the first edition which came in 2018, you would find growth taking place in couple of corners of the job market. One of them, I don't know whether you heard about it, there is a category called unpaid labor in family enterprises.
Yes.
Like the women,
Yeah.
girls,
Mothers,
boys,
stay at home
mothers.
wives. Yeah.
Uh, they don't get any wages. They don't get any paid. Uh, so they may be doing household jobs, or they may be sort of doing some work relating to um, agriculture fields or otherwise. That growth has been the largest in last 6 years.
The unpaid labor.
Right.
Yeah.
If you want to count this as jobs growth, you may feel happy in showing a certain kind of statistics, but this is not growth. This is not jobs. A job, the first condition is it should yield some wages. If it is not yielding wages or income, it's no job. The second thing which you would find that data telling you is that the employment in agriculture, which is atrociously high in the country, something of the range of about 45% of the labor works in agriculture. It went up by 3% between 2020 and 24. Now, a sector where there is a gross underemployment, disguised employment, agriculture is seeing the increase in the jobs or the employment. It's not real growth of jobs. So I would caution. You see, sometimes we have this. I've been a government officer. Uh, we have a temptation of cooking up statistics to show the picture better than what it is. It may sort of create some feel good factor for some time, but it doesn't really create a feel good factor for the people who are really affected by that. And that story, sooner or later, comes to haunt you. That is the real story of India's job growth. Now we have another problem coming up. See, one of the, which I think, unless we take it very seriously, we may be in for trouble in times to come. The best growth in last 20, 25 years in the well-paid jobs, salaried jobs, has been in the IT sector, right? We became the world's largest IT exporters. It literally contributes more than 50 to 60% of our services export, about 20% of our total exports, and that lakhs of engineers, software people have got employed. Now, what is happening is that this AI related story is appending the mental sort of or intellectual or mind jobs. It may create many new jobs. I am not a pessimistic about it, but the IT story was built by Indians' talent using its mind power, its talent to sort of create the so much of value add in the information technology services space. Now this is under severe threat. That's why you see the Anthropic and others making Indian IT giants suffer very badly. Who would have 2 years or 3 years back thought that a TCS or an Infosys valuation would come down to 13 times of its earnings? It used to say be about 35, 36 times. And people are selling these stocks now because they are seeing that in times to come, it will be difficult for these companies to maintain their profits, maintain their margins, and earn incomes. And if they don't earn incomes, they can't pay and there is now retrenchment setting in. People are being sort of laid off. If this story we have a problem of not looking ahead. Like we discussed earlier part, Chinese looked ahead, but we did not in solar electronics or something. If in the services space we don't look ahead and create the new kind of services for the world, 3 to 5 years down the line, we will have our services exports contracting and creating problems for us. So, employment story should be viewed in very, very serious terms as we speak today.
Yeah. You keep bringing China in the conversation. I can't help but ask this one question. I always think I believe that China is genuinely a success story, and West does not give it enough credit. That is a fact. Many years ago, actually, I wrote an article in CNBC, which was, I think, around in 2020, and I said, "Will India be next China?" And my response, or if you read that article, is largely nah. And it is for the reasons exactly as you mentioned. And my article starts like that. My article starts with the fact that, in 90s, we were at the same point. Our GDP per capita was the same. Our literacy rates were same. We pretty much we had the same starting point, but they ended up doing better. and they've ended up doing better. And I'm talking about that in a very non-political sense in my article, which was very data and statistics backed kind of a view, where I say it has more to do with how their literacy rates have grown. Ours weren't at the same rate. And then I spoke about their strength in natural resources, in coal or coal production, in manufacturing, and their entire geopolitical strategy, their entire economic strategy, the way they have built the entire nation is what really puts it very much far ahead of India. And for India to catch up, we have to really do some major policy infra rejig. So I agree with you on many levels that China is far ahead in terms of economic superiority or excellence as compared to India and also West largely. But there is a political debate to that, right? It is between democracy and autocracy or authoritarian regime, as they say. And so this is where I want to get your point of view. The China story, is China what it is because of the fact that it is not a democracy?
See, the risk with the autocratic systems is that it can ruin you or it can also do very well. Same China until 1976, Mao's more than 27 years or about 30 years of its sort of independence, communist rule, did so pathetically bad, right? But after 78, when they saw the economic logic of the things and they changed, and the whole of the government and the system decided that we will do what the economic logic dictates. And therefore, we'll build China as a big sort of economy. And that is what they have done. In the first decade, during the Manmohan Singh government's time, there used to be a lot of debate about Chinese dragon and Indian elephant. And the jury was out as late as 2004-5 that the Indian elephant, the democracy, will win finally, and the Chinese dragon will not, because the dictators, the autocrats, have a tendency to make a lot of wrong calls as well. And if they make wrong calls, nobody corrects them, and that is why they go down. The real story is that the opposite has happened. The dictator, the autocrat, continues to make right economic calls. Right. And that, if you look at the Chinese sort of people's point of view, what the democracy brings, for the Chinese people, the political life or freedom hasn't changed for worse as compared to 76. It is somewhat better, right? So their starting point was, and their life is better than earlier. So the Chinese people are not actually worse off. They're not criticizing, or they're not non-cooperative. Whereas in democracy, you see, the strength of democracy is like what you're seeing in United States to some extent. If a political strongman like Trump misuses the powers, decides wrong, takes wrong policy decisions. Tariffs, for example, were illegal, right? These reciprocal tariffs. But the democratic system self-corrects. Despite the Supreme Court of United States being stuffed with a lot of Republicans, Trump people, they had to declare the tariffs illegal. And the business keeps going on. So democracy's self-correcting mechanisms are supposed to make the economic choices better. Right. But in India, if the original player, see, one of the biggest sort of complaints or question which I have on policy side in India is that we are too much governmental in economy, right? Narendra Modi in 2014 started with very right kind of noises. It's not government's business to be in business. That actually captured the economic logic of government not being in the business space very well. I was actually motivated by those kind of calls, and I served with him for 2 years as the Economic Affairs Secretary and Finance Secretary. But later, if you look at the last 5 or 7 years story,
It has changed.
it is completely changed. The privatization agenda is gone.
Yeah.
The government is interfering more and more into the economic space. The kind of regulations, the tax laws, etc., we have GST, ED, etc., makes the life of businessmen more and more complex. The government is in procurement, etc., is created. So, despite being India a democracy, and there are, I may say this, that there are now questions about India's democratic credentials as well. But democracy has not worked as a self-correcting, as a rejuvenating, as a promoting kind of mechanism for growth of India. Whereas autocratic administration in China has sort of pushed the growth. So how it works, both the system works makes the difference. A North Korean dictator, or an Albanian dictator earlier, or even a Suharto in Indonesia, can actually create big problems. In China, I mentioned itself, for the economy, but a different kind of dictator. So I don't think we should look for dictatorship as a solution for economic ills. The problem is more fundamental.
But I think my point of view is, look, as far as there is economic prosperity, people are okay with whatever the regime is. Is it democratic? Is it autocratic? It is authoritarian. And like you rightly said, that irrespective of the kind of government that you have or administration you have, at the end of the day, it is the people in leadership. If they're making the right economic call, then it completely works for the system. And that's what we're seeing with China. So it is defying the overall belief, or the long lasting standard ethical moral belief that they have, that the democracy is self correcting and autocratic regimes are not. So you mentioned about taxes briefly, right? And so that brings me to my next question. Average salaried Indian feels overtaxed. So, and I want to throw in some data. So, PRS data says individual income tax return filers were only about 6% of the population in India in 23 and 24, and 63% of those individual filers had zero tax liability. This is shocking. Okay. And so the salaried person feels my tax is deducted even before I receive my salary, but large part of the economy is still informal, exempt, or underreported. So is the salaried class overtaxed, or is the real issue that too few Indians pay direct taxes?
So, Anu, if you take India's population as 140 crore and average size about 3 per family today, you get about 40, 45 crore sort of families in the country. Let's say 40 crores. About 10 crores of these 40 crore families file tax returns, and only about 3 crores pay the tax. This is we have the last data of 22-23 available. For what reasons the government has chosen not to sort of disclose data after 22-23? This is financial year, actual 22-23 data is You can make a lot of guesses about it. My guess is that the number of 3 crore has further come down. It would have come down to about 2 crores in 24-25. So only 2 crore people pay taxes, 8 crore file returns but not pay taxes, and 30 crore of the households don't even file a return. Now, if you take these things together and then conclude, are we highly taxed or undertaxed? So, if you look at these 2 to 3 crore people who pay tax, they pay all the tax, right? So, they may feel that we are overtaxed, right? Because the benefit which Nirmala Sitharaman announced 15 months back, that 12 lakhs income is completely exempt, is not available to them, right? So they may feel overtaxed, but the 8 crore people who file returns earn up to 12 lakhs rupees a month, a year today, only talk. They don't have any reason to feel overtaxed. And of course, 30 crore, 35 crores people have no means, no income to even think of paying tax. They receive more subsidies from the government, whether it's food subsidies or fertilizer subsidies or uh, PM Kisan and other many hundreds of the government spends over 10 lakh crores of rupees, more than what it gets in, or around the same level it gets in the income tax from the people in different kind of subsidies, which reach to these 30 crore and kind of households. So I don't think India's story can be sort of summed up as too taxed or not taxed or relaxed taxed. It's a mix of all.
But this is a very this debate has been going on for decades now, in different forms, in different layers. We've been discussing it, like this is a known fact that India in some ways is under taxed or underreported tax economy. Every year government has come up with some or the other solution to fix it. We still don't have a solution. A large part, I mean, 100 billion plus, and you're saying only 3 crore 4 crore actually pay taxes, rest don't. That is the most shocking fact that we are living with. And somehow, what is the reason, whatever it is that we're doing, why is it not enough for us to really ensure that people who are making money are actually paying their taxes and their dues to the government? What is happening, and what is it that is government doing is not enough?
See, there are two reasons. Sometimes we tend to mix up the story by sort of giving too much of reasoning to the tax evasion kind of thing. Over last 20-25 years, with several measures having taken by the government, including sort of getting everyone's Aadhaar, inputted PAN numbers, etc., all the transactions captured. I think the evasion of income tax is much smaller today. I don't think we should be that much worried, or that we should sort of pass on this, that this is because of the tax evasion. I don't think that's the case. It is really the level of income. I talked to you earlier about PLFS data. The PLFS said there were 65 crore employed people in 23-24. Employed people. And here, since many families have both husband and wife working, maybe we can place it around 50 crore people who are employed, or 40 crore people who are employed. The PLFS data tells you that only about 20% of them have salaried jobs. The rest are all casual self-employment and what I talked to you, unpaid labor in family enterprises. And of the 20 people, which will mean about 8 crore people or 10 crore people, so that their average wage is about 22,000 rupees per month. So if average wage of the salaried worker, because it all includes your maid and others, because they are considered by our system as salaried, and the regular income wage earning people, if their income is only about 23,000 per month per workers, that translates to about 3 lakh rupees or so on an average. Now, if you don't tax up to 12 lakhs, then they would the wage data will also subscribe to the fact that not more than 2 to 3 crore people would be in the country which have income of more than 1 lakh rupees per month.
So I understand, okay, informal, unorganized sector employee or worker, given that their income is so low, whether they're evading or not, the contribution is not going to make a dent to our overall tax contribution to the country. I understand that. And that by number and percentage still remains very low, as you rightly said. So then that brings me to the next question. What happens to these enterprises, not the small enterprises, but medium to large enterprises, corporates? How are their tax contributing to our economy? And if they are actually underreporting their taxes or they are undertaxed, why do we not have provisions to make or have them contribute more to our economy?
See, that is more on the indirect taxes side. I'll come to that, no problems. The this MSME or the small and medium and micro enterprises story is again overprotected story, right? They don't really make very good sort of income. Sometimes people will quote that this pakoda wala sitting here in Khan Market or makes crores of income per month, right? These are few and far between kind of anecdotal stories. That number is not very large, right? And therefore, seeking sort of solution in them, but instead of see what one thing you would appreciate, you are in the United States. A taxi driver will give you a receipt. Anybody will give you a receipt today. You make credit card payments and things like that. And but in India, we exempt all of these people. The official limit is that if you earn less than 40 lakhs rupees, if you are a supplier of goods or service, and 20 lakhs if you're a supplier of service or something, you don't have to even register. For a digitally advanced countries, simply allowing so many people to stay away from the taxation system, accounting system, is what in a way might be encouraging some underreporting. Because when you say 40 lakhs, people who have turnover of 1 crore or something will not also register, thinking that they are 40 lakhs or less. What is the way for the government to find out? And why should government? Likewise, we have a system where you can sort of compound the tax if you have turnover of less than 3 crores. That makes another thing. You don't have to keep records of your vouchers and other kind of thing. Can this country think of that everyone, irrespective, we can design very simple systems, that everyone who sells anything is part of the network. In fact, you can encourage If you go back to South Korea and others, the stories of how they encouraged everyone to ask for a invoice linked to lottery and other kind of incomes. If you link it with with these guys to a negative tax support, that if your income actually is less than 40 lakhs, your turnover, the government will provide you support, report everything. Then you can get the entire economic data and you can get the higher turnover guys also. Then you also need to design a kind of package for those who have. So bring everyone in,
Yeah.
use technology
Yes.
that might lay down the path rather than this kind of escaping arrangements.
But I think sometimes that is more like political vote bank. You don't
That's
want
it.
to touch them because then it will affect your vote. And because you're pointing out about United States, that's what it is. Here also there are income thresholds. Below a certain income, you are not taxed. But that income is reported because this is highly
Exactly.
digitalized economy, right? Even my cab driver,
That
when
is
I,
the difference.
yeah. And
You
but that should
report
be
everything.
introduced. But that is the kind of mechanisms we should introduce in India because, like you rightly said, that snack guy, thele wala in Khan market is now making crores. But he's now moved from making certain thousands to certain crores. But his is an unregistered business. He's making money. He's doing it all in cash. He's buying everything in cash. But he's also not someone who will be paying taxes. See, that's the point that I was trying to make. Like there is economic mobility when you are below bottom of the pyramid. Makes sense for you to have all incentives. But as you grow up the pyramid, then that is tax evasion if you're not really reporting your income. Now that you're making crores and
You
you
see,
still report.
if you make this system self-reporting,
Hmm.
then you get who is making money and has to pay tax, and who is not making money and deserves government support.
Hmm.
Right?
But right now everything is blurry. So because he's an
Everything is
unorganized business on as a street vendor, he forever continues to be in that marginalized economic beneficiary as opposed to someone who's actually affluent. And so those are the policy infra or policy changes that the government has to make to ensure that in some ways we have a mechanism to track this upward mobility of the micro businesses and small businesses as they move towards medium or large businesses eventually.
no, by the way, now with the UPI and the electronic payments, even in the informal economy, more than 90% of the transactions are through digital system.
And they're captured now.
They can be captured, they are captured, they just need to be linked together. And but instead of linking in a systemic, sensible system, you would have heard about the Karnataka case when the Karnataka's GST department went after some of the fruit sellers, fruit vendors, because their aggregate turnover, as per the UPI payment systems, etc., exceeded 40 lakhs.
Oh my God. So more than a salaried employee. Come on.
No, this is turnover.
Okay.
This is not profit.
Yeah,
This is
but
turnover.
yeah, it's still large. I mean, even if, okay, so it's
No,
40 lakhs, even if the margins are 15%, it's still a big number.
correct. So the fact is, but that government had to step back from taking any action because they sort of this 40 lakhs turnover, this is that, I made transfer, I do
Hmm.
this. So you have to design a well oiled system of capturing every transaction digitally, supported by today UPI or otherwise payment, and then create incentives, right incentives for the people to pay the taxes or receive support from the government. Only then you can sort of create the right incentives and system.
Yeah. That brings us to the next chapter, which is basically petrol, fuel prices, and the hidden taxes in terms of our petrol prices. So, the war between Iran and US was over until 48 hours ago. It has started again. But until about a few days, few weeks back, we saw the oil prices drop, the global crude oil prices drop. But why hasn't the petrol price gotten cheaper in India? Uh, in your recent article in Deccan Herald, I read, you asked a very important question. Every Indian consumer understands if international fuel prices are down, the local petrol prices should also go down. Why hasn't that happened in India? Why has government not slashed petrol prices domestically?
See, what we have done, especially after 2015, is that we have unlinked the, the petrol and the diesel prices from their underlying international prices. So there is no real connection between Indian price at petrol pump and the international prices. This we did for two reasons. One reason was that revising petrol prices and diesel prices every day was becoming problematic logistically, otherwise, or every week. So, and second was that this used to create enormous amount of volatility because petrol underlying crude prices change quite a lot. So you've seen crude going to 120, 130. You've seen crude going to 45 or even less. So such kind of adjustment in the pump prices create their own problems, right? And especially for a country like India, which has a lot of taxation riding on the petroleum products prices. We have more than 50% uh, of the price is in the form of taxes, right? So that introduces volatility for the tax side as well and the price. So Narendra Modi government over the years decided to delink it. And once it had increased to a certain level, reducing it again when the prices went down, there was an element of that it will discourage renewable transition. So why discourage if it is not too high, right? So all these policy decisions led to a situation where prior to Iran American war, our petroleum prices were much higher than what the international prices would justify. That allowed the Narendra Modi government to not increase the petroleum prices as much as others did, where the price is linked. Now, when the prices have come down to the levels prevalent before the war, others have adjusted downward, but we have not adjusted because in the meantime we had one more decision taken. So since the West Bengal and other elections were going on, for 1.5 months we did not increase. So under recoveries built up. Now when you are making profit again, the oil companies are making profit again, it takes some time for those under recoveries to recover. So since we have so much of discretionary management of the prices, they the link with the international price of crude is broken, and that introduces doubts about the mind of the people. People won't sort of argue against when the price was not increased that much, but they would expect the prices to be brought down even before the recoveries were made. So this complexity, we can solve this by either going back to the international price linkages or put a floor. We will not reduce below this, but we will not allow it to go above this. But in that floor, the prices would adjust. Right. So a more sensible policy is needed to create more confidence and certainty in the mind of people.
Yeah, I think the whole discrepancy or the opacity in how the crude prices and the petrol prices are linked, or how the overall petrol pricing works in India, that creates a lot of doubt and confusion in mind of people, and then they tend to believe that if it is so direct connection, direct link, then I should have the direct benefit. But that's not how it is. And thank you so much for bringing this clarity, because for the longest time even I did not know this, but I understood the underreporting or the undercutting or undermining the profits for the oil companies. But this was, you put this very in a very simplistic and a very concise way, so thank you for that. This brings me to my next question. This is something which is debated a lot in the price of the petrol, and how petrol prices or our dependency on crude and petrol has been over the years. Middle class sees this as a hidden tax on them, the increase in the volatility in petrol prices. So one of the things that government has now announced is the introduction of ethanol as one of the elements in our fuel, for us to make the overall petrol price cheaper and reduce our dependency on crude. I want to know what is your view on that.
See, the ethanol blending system was introduced in 2018, practically, though it is going on at the scale at which the government now talks, the E20 kind of thing, 20% blending in petrol. The target was fixed at 2030. We have achieved it now. So in 2018, if you go back, there were two very troubling situations which was there. One, thanks to overproduction of sugar globally, the sugar prices had crashed. As a result, Indian sugar manufacturers, sugar factories, were not able to even pay to the farmers their dues, and the dues had accumulated. It had become a political problem for the government, and some solution had to be found out. The second thing was that the government had set out to reduce dependence on the import of crude for meeting the petroleum products need of the country. When Modi government took over the government, it was about 74-75%. He promised to bring it to about 67% by 22. Today it is about 85-87%. But in 2018, when that was not working, it was thought that if you blend ethanol into petrol, maybe you can bring down the dependence to some extent. So I think motivated by these two things, it became a political call of increasing ethanol into petrol. And it became a government's sort of desirable political program, because you have farmers vote, the sugar cane, if they get paid, they would be happy. If you can introduce reduction or dependence on that, that's helpful for the country and all. So that, I think, made the government introduce it. By the way, the serious analysis would have told that's not going to make too much of difference. By the way, we have about 20% consumption of petrol, 80% comes from diesel. And if you mix 20% ethanol, 20% or 20 is 4%. So in all, the difference it would make is only about 3 to 4%. It's not a big difference making in the petroleum products kind of thing. And there are other issues as well. But what I think the government got it wrong, and which is creating a problem now, it became very ambitious. So there are lots of complaints about the damage of vehicles, etc. Politically also, the government is facing it now. But to get to this 20% production of petroleum literage, so to say, the government decided on a very lucrative program for encouraging the businessmen to put ethanol making factories. Right. They were promised a very
Large
good price.
incentive. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that they can make profit. They were promised cheaper loans from the banks. So today, if I can give you a rough estimate, if sugarcane based ethanol cost the oil marketing company about 70 rupees or 68 rupees per liter, the the cost for the ethanol producer is about 50% of that, something in the range of 35, 36 rupees per liter. Taken into other cost, it's able to make about 15 to 20% margin, 15 rupees, 10 to 15 rupees per liter on ethanol today. Right. So when the industrialists saw that there is so much of profit making opportunity coming into ethanol, they went after it. Today we have more than 100% excess capacity, over 20% ethanol making target. We need about 10 billion liters of ethanol to meet the 20% requirement, but the capacity is about 20 billion liters. So they have overcapacity now. If the government now has got into a situation, so while it cleared the farmers' dues, etc., so farmers they didn't get any extra price. So when Hardeep Puri says that the farmers have got a lot of payments, that is not the extra payments. Their incomes did not increase. They got only paid for
The rightful
what
income. They got their rightful
exactly.
income. That's what it is.
Right. But sugarcane growing has become is more profitable than other crops. So they don't mind if they are paid to grow more sugarcane. If you look at the data today, India is seeing lesser acreage this year thanks to lesser rains, but acreage or sowing of sugarcane is higher than last year. This creates the farmers incentives. So everyone is getting incentives. Farmer has incentive, industrialist has incentive. It's only the customer who is facing the problem, because it has no choice to get a normal petrol today in the country.
And that also translates to more pollution.
I don't think the studies tell that ethanol based petrol is more polluting. It gives less average.
No, but I'm talking about the entire value chain of production.
There, the big issue is actually overuse of water, because sugarcane is an excessively water consuming. I think that for producing 1 liter of ethanol, you need about 5,000 liters of water.
Oh my God. This is
Think
this
of
is and
that.
this is in a country where we, in a lot of parts of the country, we experience water scarcity. This is
Absolutely.
yeah. So this is
It's
shocking.
so. In fact, we shouldn't be encouraging sugarcane crop, right? But we are encouraging sugarcane. So that is where the problem is more acute. But for the customer, the fact that the customer doesn't have the choice of the fuel without ethanol, and the ethanol based fuel 20%, acknowledgedly by the government, causes about 5% of the mileage loss. And there are damaging consequences for the engine and other things. I think that is creating a big pushback. I think the government will have a review of the whole. They're trying to keep a brave face so far, except announcing that no more higher ethanol blending kind of thing, which will put the industry into a problem spot now, because they will not be able to use more than 50% of their capacity. If that is the case, the industry will start crying out. But the government, I think chickens are coming to roost now. The badly conceived ethanol policy, over ambitious, is now going to come to haunt the government.
That is pretty shocking. And I think we also have to factor in the uh, factory led output, which also leads to pollution. And that is another factor. So, in a sense, what is happening right now is that in the aspiration of actually getting cheaper fuel or cheaper petrol, we have created a Frankenstein's monster where we are dealing with problems on so many levels, including pollution and a price which
I think
normal.
we shouldn't be over ambitious, and we should do our calculations right. There is a very good case for ethanol production in conditions where there is an excess crop.
Hmm.
If you have too much of rice crop, then you need to utilize something, or you have a sugar price crash internationally, and sugar cane production is, or sugar production or sugar juice production is much higher than the need. Somewhere you need to get it right, use it. So if we can create a sort of variety of a fuel, let's say 10% ethanol, and use the excess uh, use the excess production in times to produce ethanol, and you store it to use it to the extent of about 10%, give the people this choice of fuel, maybe at little less than the normal petrol price. I think a lot of people will buy the ethanol 10, and the country's volatility in terms of the overproduction, some requiring the shift to ethanol, will also be solved. So we need a better policy formulation rather than over enthusiastic to show that we are doing something very great by pushing the ethanol to 20% or higher than the than 20%. Yeah.
Yeah. Because we're still talking about petrol and crude prices and stuff, one of the questions that was going through my mind was about the rupee depreciation, right? So, rupee, dollar, and our overall wealth protection. Uh, if India is rising, why does rupee keep falling? For average middle class, this feels contradictory. We say India is becoming stronger, but rupee is getting weaker over time. That affects our imports, especially our crude imports, oil, foreign education, travel, technology, inflation, and savings. So, should rupee depreciation be seen as normal for a developing economy like ours? Or is it a warning sign of some sorts for an economy like ours?
You see, like in case of dichotomy between the growth and employment, this dichotomy between supposedly high growth and rupee depreciation is a dichotomy that can be sort of sorted out or explained if you sort of remove this first statement that India's growth is rising. That is not the case, honestly. We discussed this. The fact that rupee depreciation has been so sharp, last year we witnessed the highest depreciation of rupee in the country. Even today, this year also 3 to 4% depreciation has taken place, despite announcement of so many desperate measures like providing rupee interest rate on the dollar deposits in the country. I don't know how you are taking it sitting in America. Uh, Despite such measures, the rupee refuses to sort of strengthen. That should tell you that there is a real problem.
So, you think this is
The,
a warning sign for us in terms of
of
economic policy
course,
reforms?
we should take it that way. I find this measure taken by the government to give tax concession on the government securities, investment by FPIs, FCNRB deposits getting 2 to 3% higher rate than anywhere else they get on dollar deposits, or the government or the Reserve Bank of India standing to provide free hedging cover. These are desperate measures. I think the rest of the world would see this as real weakness of Indian rupee. And instead of these measures bringing sort of comfort for the rupee, these will create further problems for the rupee in times to come.
This was a brilliant takeaway. This brings us to the very end of our episode. I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for giving us detailed understanding of what Indian economy is right now. I think you've simplified it for everybody out there. And even for me, I mean, listening through this, like rightly, our objective in the beginning was we're going to go beneath the headlines, we're going to scratch the surface and see what it is like. And I am, my takeaway from this, my perspective of on India, Indian growth, Indian economy has changed so much, and I'm sure it'll be the same for my viewers as well. I want to thank you so much for your time for doing this over the weekend, and talking with us for almost 2 hours now. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Anu. It was a pleasure.
I
People,
agree. I think this
rather
was one
than
of the most candid conversations I've ever had with most people. And if you see my channel, I've spoken to a few more people about India as well. And but I mean, that may also be their opinion. But so many times it comes across as very measured, very calculated, very politically correct point of view, because they know they're going to be out there in public. They don't want any backlash. But I think you have been very unfiltered. You've been very honest with us. And some may think this is bleak, this is grim, but this is the ground reality. And I want to thank you so much for bringing this reality to the talk lane and to the viewers. Thank you, sir.
thank you, Anu. All the best to you.